Welcome to the video. It's another one of my record reviews, and today I'm going to talk about an album that was released 45 years ago in 1976, and the album is by a singer-songwriter called Ian Hunter, and the album is called All American Alien Boy. So who's Ian Hunter, you might ask? Well, if you're of a certain vintage, you will know, but he was the lead singer and songwriter for a band called Mott the Hoople, who were kind of a glam rock band in the early to mid 1970s. Now, they'd released a couple of albums and were about to fade into obscurity. They weren't very successful, but then David Bowie came along and offered them All the Young Dudes, and they released that, they recorded that and released that as a single, and it was a big hit, and then they built an album around it, and they went on to release albums like Mott, and then The Hoople, and singles like Honolulu Boogie, All the Way from Memphis, and several others. Great band, and I had the singles at the time, but I never had any of Mott the Hoople's albums. And I was so lucky one day. I got an invite. I don't know how it came about, but I was in the studio at BBC Radio Newcastle with about 15 or 20 other young music fans to sit in on a broadcast. And while we were there, they were handing out albums to people who were there. You could have your pick, and I was offered an album by, I think it might have been one of the Genesis albums that I already owned, and I didn't take it, so instead I took All American Alien Boy, because I obviously knew who he was. Now, one of the things about Ian Hunter that's worth mentioning is, in this particular album, it doesn't sound anything like Mott the Hoople. Instead, you've got the sound of a mature singer-songwriter, a mature music business professional who really knew what he was doing. And he was pretty well known because he'd had some success already, and he was considered to be, one of the more intelligent singer-songwriters at the time in the rock business. And he was he got a little fame is probably the wrong word, when he wrote this book called Diary of a Rock and Roll Star, which is kind of a bit of a travelogue of a tour with Mott the Hoople in the United States, I believe. I've had that for years, but I've not read it for a long time. But this book, and he is considered to be someone with good intelligence and a lot of humility. But coming back to the idea that he was very, very well known, this album has got some fantastic players on it. You've got top session musicians like Ainsley Dunbar on drums, Chris Stainton on the piano, Jaco Pastorius, the jazz bassist who came to prominence in Weather Report, and who at the time, I think, this album was also working with Joni Mitchell, being the bass guitarist on Hejira, and then the live album Shadows and Light. So there's a lot of well-known musicians on this album. So he's so well connected. What can I say about it? Yeah, so well connected. One of the things that comes out of this is that not only is he intelligent, but he's got a humility about him and a wisdom about him. The tracks on this album go from everything from perhaps typical hard rockers to very touching ballads, and he comes across as a really wise and kind of humble person. What can you expect if you listen to this album? Well, as I've already mentioned, you've got a whole mixture here. Looking at side one here, not sure if you can see that, you've got the first track is called Letter to Britannia from the Union Jack. It's kind of a languid, rolling track, mid-paced, really quite, very melodic. It's really nice. It seems to be saying something about the British Empire and Britain being responsible for certain things, some bad things in the past, but it's kind of has a stylish tone of forgiveness within that. It's really quite nice, and I don't know quite if that's what it is all about, and he's probably answered the question of what it is all about many times over the years. But really nice, kind of gentle, opening start, lots of electric piano on it. The second track really kicks in. It's the title track, All American Alien Boy, which seems to be a bit of a kind of a story about how he left the UK to move to America, where he still resides today. 45 years later, I believe he's based in Connecticut. Irene Wild follows, which is a really touching song about a non-affair he had with a prospective girlfriend that he saw or knew of in a bus station, Barker Street bus station. He talks about, but it was unrequited, and so he kind of says to himself, and it says in the lyrics that he's gonna be somebody someday. So he was gonna work on that rejection and then use that as a spur to become somebody someday. And it's personal to me. I remember at the time, soon afterwards, in fact, I had a girlfriend who said goodbye to me at a bus station as she was leaving for Italy to become an au pair. And it was a sad experience at the time. But we both grew up very quickly afterwards, and 45 years later, we're still friends. So that's all good news, although she does live on the other side of the world. The last track on side one is called Restless Youth. Now, Restless Youth is kind of a really a kind of a lyric about how the Americans had kind of neglected to bring up their teenagers, in a really positive way. And so this person who he's writing about and singing about is a small criminal that is destined to become a hardened criminal over time. So yeah, restless youth. So the play there to harness that restlessness and make something positive from it. Moving on to side two, it opens with a very gospel-y, slow kind of a bluesy type track called Rape. I was too young to know much about such things in those days when I first heard it. But of course, maturity brings lots of stories you hear in the news about how horrific such things are. And this seems to be to a certain degree, from the rapist's point of view, about how he's expecting to be caught and be expected to face justice. And he's got a bit of a dig at the law profession, who kind of defends such people as well. Then you've got You Nearly Did Me In. And this is notable because it includes the backing vocals of 3 members of Queen, and it sounds very much like Queen. Now, Queen supported Mott the Hoople on a British tour as Queen were emerging as a new band. And I had an old friend of mine who's now sadly gone, who always seemed to see some of the real classic gigs that I missed out on, and that was one of them, seeing Queen support Mott the Hoople. Fantastic. But this kind of it's everyone but John Deacon from Queen kind of sing, really big chorus. It's kind of slow. It's not a toe tapper, but it's really big, and it's got a kind of a gospel-y feel as well. Some great female backing vocalists on that as well. Apathy 83 is could have been written today, about the apathetic approach or the view of politics and business and society in the United States. Yeah, it kind of skips along very nicely, and the accordion is a very dominant instrument in melody. And finally, you've got God Take One. Now, some critics describe this as Ian Hunter does Bob Dylan, and I know what they mean, because it starts in a very acoustic style and sounds a little bit like 80s Bob Dylan, so maybe ahead of his time, perhaps. Maybe Dylan was influenced by Ian Hunter, who knows. But anyway, it starts acoustic, and it's a conversation between the singer and God. And this conversation just goes on. There's no chorus. It just gradually builds and builds, and more instruments are added. But it stays restrained throughout, and it's a track full of wisdom and humanity, and it's really makes you think when you listen to it. So that's it. There's a CD version which has got some extra tracks, which has maybe God Take Two, in fact, but some alternative versions of some of the tracks as well. Who would like this? Well, anybody who likes singer-songwriters, but with a bit more, so looking for intelligent lyrics, looking for good melodies, but like a little bit more instrumentation than the singer-songwriter genre usually serves up. So this is much more substantial than, say, a James Taylor album, at least instrumentally. I'm not saying anything about James Taylor's lyrical ability, because I like him too. It's for people who I think it was made at the time, by the way, to appeal to a UK market and an American market, and so he kind of straddles two markets. And I think because it never had a really big single coming from it, it was kind of not very well rated by the rock music journalists, who kind of were always a bit sniffy about this album. But I think it stood the test of time, and I think if you're into that kind of American rock and a traditional kind of 70s rock, but like that eclectic mix and the intelligence, I think there's a lot to be found in this album. That's why I'm still recommending it 45 years after I bought it.